Chapter 2. Sikh counseling. Ghazal fussed over his tunic and medals. 30 years in the military had made him much more staunch about his uniform's appearance. The fact that he was the kingdom's prince and most skilled combatant in the heavy attack corps only made it more important to him that he look impeccable when he wore his uniform. I could swear I had this ironed out, Ghazal grumbled as he pinched the corner of his uniform's collar between his finger and thumb, rubbing it stubbornly. I sighed and reached up to pop his hand away from his collar. Stop it. You're seeing imperfections that aren't there again. If they see me looking any less than my best, they'll think you're mortal. I finished for him. Honestly, you're a prince. Imperfections aren't even acknowledged or accounted for nearly as much as the logistic of the details of our proposal. We need to make sure that we have our details straight more than anything else. Ghazal pursed his lips in frustration as he looked down at me. You're right. I just don't want them to think we came to them without looking respectable. I rolled my eyes. Honestly, Ghazal, we eat dinner with most of them at least once a week in the palace. We may be here in an official capacity today, but they know we aren't going to dress in any way other than our best. No one else will look as good as we do today, even if there are minor flaws in our outfits. So settle down. I'm just nervous, Ghazal grumbled. And you shouldn't be, I tittered. You're being silly right now. I'm never silly, he replied staunchly. Well, I've got some bad news for you, but you're being silly right now. I smirked up at him playfully. He was about to protest when the doors to the council chamber opened, and one of the guards stepped out. He bowed his head. My prince and princess, the council is ready to see you now. Ghazal and I both gave a slight bow of our heads. The guard opened the door and indicated that we should enter. As we passed through the doorway, the guard announced us. The chamber was a circular room, dominated by its Spartan condition. Dwarven architecture carved high, straight lines with angled designs up to the ceiling. But no tapestries or mosaics adorned the walls. The floor was black stone, polished to a mirror sheen. The only things that broke up the stonework was the door to the chamber, and semicircle Daesh the council would sit at on the opposite side. To our surprise, the full council was sitting in session today. That meant all 8 ministers as well as father. All of them had their gazes fixed on us as we entered. The interest and anticipation in their expressions was palpable. This was the first time either of us had addressed the council in any official capacity. So it shouldn't have surprised us that they would all be interested in hearing what we had to say. But seeing father heading the council for once, instead of being informed on the issues that were brought to them, was a surprise. I had to imagine he wanted to be there for his children's first official address. The chamber settled into silence as Ghazal and I approached the center of the floor. The polished back stone reflected us perfectly beneath our feet, as though the room itself wished to weigh us twice before allowing us to speak. Father leaned forward slightly from his seat at the center of the dais. His expression was composed, but there was something behind his eyes. Not skepticism, but not quite pride either. Anticipation, perhaps. The kind that comes when something long expected has finally arrived. You requested this session, he said evenly, allowing no preference or deference to make its way into his tone. Pure neutrality, speak. Ghazal indeed slowly beside me. I could feel the tension inside him like a drawn bowstring. He was ready, but he was also aware of what this meant. This was not some standard military report he was used to giving. Nor was this a simple request. This was us stepping into the space where decisions began to shape the kingdom and its future. He stepped forward, half a pace. Your Majesty, honored council, he began, voice steady and formal. Princess Merida and I come before you with a proposal regarding the long-term defense of Dworgen. There was a faint shift among the ministers, mostly out of interest rather than surprise. Defense was always a subject worth listening to, but the tone in Ghazal's voice made it clear. This was not routine. Father gave a small nod. Continue. Ghazal glanced down at me briefly, just enough to confirm we were still aligned in purpose. Then looked back up when I gave him a reassuring smile. Our kingdom has enjoyed decades of relative peace, he said. This peace is not accidental. It is maintained by the strength of our military and the deterrent of our reputation. However, both of these rely heavily on the continued presence of key individuals. A few eyes flicked between us. They understood immediately who he meant. Minister Varn, head of military logistics, leaned back slightly in his chair. You refer to yourself and your sister. I do, Ghazal replied without hesitation. And that is precisely the problem. That drew more attention. Even Father's posture shifted slightly, Gazel continued. If either of us were to be absent, the perception of Dworgen's strength would weaken. If both of us were absent, even temporarily, it would invite opportunistic aggression from outside forces. And you intend to propose a solution to this, said Minister Haldrick, his tone neutral but edged with curiosity. We do, Gazel said. He stepped back that same half a pace. Merida will explain. All eyes turned to me. I let the silence sit for a moment, not long enough to be awkward, but just long enough to make sure they were listening. Then I smiled. The short version, I said lightly, is that I want to replace us. The reaction was immediate. Not outrage. Not just yet. But the room shifted sharply. Several ministers straightened. One leaned forward with narrowed eyes. Another let out a short, incredulous breath. I didn't know what they had expected when we had requested this audience. But this was certainly not it. Father's gaze sharpened. Explain. I clasped my hands behind my back and began to pace slowly, just a step or two. Enough to break the stillness without disrespecting the chamber. Our current defense structure is reactive. It relies on detection, mobilization, and response. It works because we are fast, strong, and disciplined. But it is still reactive. Minister Varn nodded slightly. That is the nature of warfare. That is the current nature of warfare, I said, correcting just slightly. It does not have to remain so. I stopped and looked up at the... What if Dworgen did not need to react? Or, what if its defense was constant, unyielding, and ever-present? What if its defense could be initiated immediately upon detection, and simultaneously mobilize Dwarven defenders? There was a pause before Minister Haldrick frowned faintly. You are describing a standing army. No, I said softly. Though I do think having one would be very useful. No, I am describing something that does not tire, does not hesitate, does not require training, food, or morale. Now they were listening intently. I let the next words land clearly. I am proposing the creation of autonomous defensive golems. The chamber went silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from confusion, but the kind that came from recognition, because every single one of them knew what that meant. Minister Doran, the eldest among them, let out a slow breath. That is not a new idea, Princess. Howent. No, I agreed with a smile. It is not. And yet, he continued, it is one that has never been successfully realized. Correct again, I nodded, my smile unwavering. His eyes narrowed. Then why bring it to us as though it were achievable? Because it is, I said with happy confidence. The mood in the room tightened. Automated golem defenses had been a goal of Dwarven craftsmen for millennia. And each time it has been tried, it failed for multiple reasons. Minister Varn leaned forward now. On what basis do you make that claim? I tilted my head. Because the failures of the past were not due to impossibility. They were due to incomplete understanding. That is a bold statement, Haldrick said with a laugh that reflected his assumption of my audacious statement. It's an accurate one, I replied as I began to walk again, slowly circling just enough to keep my momentum moving. In my research, I found that previous attempts at golem creation failed for 3 primary reasons: structural instability, inefficient mana consumption, and lack of adaptive control. A few brows furrowed, others leaned in. The furrowed brows belonged to ministers who had worked on golem research. Those who leaned in were those who had written on the efforts, but were always intrigued when a new idea came about. They could not maintain form under sustained stress, I clarified. They required constant magical input to function, and even when they were operational, they were little more than blunt instruments. Minister Doran gave a slow now. That sums up the generally accepted results. They're simply unsustainable and amount to little more than glorified battering ram. Indeed, I agreed. But that's because that is exactly where everyone stops trying to make them work. And you intend to go further? Father asked. I looked up at him and smiled. I already have. The room went silent again, this time with anticipation. Gazel didn't move. He didn't even react. But I could feel the slight shift in him. He knew exactly what I was doing, and was prepared to stand by me in these next few defining moments. Minister Varn's eyes narrowed. Explain yourself. I raised one hand slightly, palm up. A faint shimmer of magic gathered above it. Then, with a soft, almost casual motion, I shaped it. Stone rose from the floor slowly. It flowed, like liquid given form. It twisted upward, compacting, refining, smoothing, until it formed a small figure. Humanoid in shape with rough articulation. Simple, but stable. So stable that it stood resting in the palm of my hand. The chamber went very still as I lowered myself, and put my fingertips against the polished floor. The figure moved, not stiffly or puppet-like, but deliberate. It walked forward with simple steps. Then it turned to look back at me, waiting patiently. Minister Haldry stood without realizing it. Yes, I said softly, understanding all the depth of the single word without needing him to say more. Minister Varn's voice was quieter now as he leaned forward, taking in the process of the small figure. It is being sustained, without continuous casting. Correct, Minister, I said as I stood back up. Then what is controlling it? I tapped my temple lightly. Its design. The small construct raised its arm, paused, then lowered it again as it awaited instruction. You see, current golem theory treats them as extensions of the caster, I explained. That is the flaw. They require constant input because they are never truly independent. The flaw in every design attempted so far was that the initial part of every design was fundamentally flawed. Their design required constant input because their design placed a mage with every golem to sustain and power it. Then what makes yours different? Doran asked. Mine are independent, I replied. Their structure, function, and response parameters are all set at the time of their creation, with the idea that a mage is not present. Ye down. Minister Haldrick slowly sat back down. How do they function if they do not require a mage to continuously fuel them with magic? They draw ambient magic from the world, I replied. The design incorporates a special type of stone, which not only draws in magic, but contains it. Each golem would become its own self-sustaining automaton. And can it be scaled from? He gestured to the minuscule construct. I smiled, of course. That's the entire point. Father's gaze had not left the construct. Speak plainly, Merida. I nodded. I can build an army that does not need to be commanded. One that defends Dorgan at all times, regardless of whether Gazel or I are present. Minister Varn spoke up. What are the limitations? A fair question, Minister, I said, as I gestured slightly, and the small construct dissolved back into inert stone. The first is the cost to make one. They require initial material investment of high-quality stone refined metals, certain stones, and specific enchantment substrates. The stronger the construct, the greater the cost. After that, I continued, they can only perform actions for which they have in energy reserves. They can only hold so much energy, and every action they perform draws from their reserve. Their intake of mana is capable of keeping them operational at normal outputs. However, increased offensive or defensive operations can draw power quickly. The solution would be to have redundant power stones as part of the design so that stones have their energy drawn from, and once depleted, the golem begins to draw from the next one, while the other charges passively. And control, Doran asked. If they are autonomous, how are they governed? I paused a moment before answering. While autonomous, they can only perform actions they're programmed to perform, with each action branching from a hierarchy of commands, depending on what's going on around them. However, a secondary override system can be keyed to designated individuals. I inclined my head slightly toward Gazel. Then Father. Minister Varn's gaze sharpened. So only the royal line can control them. I shook my head. No, Minister. We can put in a chain of command protocol into them which recognizes ranks within the Dwarven military and government, while any member of those two bodies would be able to command a golem. The golem would defer to the highest-ranking individual present, which means a new recruit could command a golem if no one else is around, but couldn't use the golem to stage a coup, because anyone above his rank can retake control of the golem. Minister Varn's gaze sharpened as he came to an unpleasant conclusion. That would mean that ultimate power over the golems would reside with the royal line. That would be correct, Minister, I nodded. That is a concentration of power, he accused. You're asking us to approve the creation of a force that answers to a system you designed from a source we cannot regulate, and ultimately bends to the will of the throne. Tell me, Princess, at what point does this cease to be defense and become control? Yes, it is, I agreed. I met his gaze without wavering. I didn't bother softening or dodging the accusation, because the real issue wasn't about cost or feasibility. It was about control. Power always concentrates somewhere, Minister. The question is not whether it exists, but rather whether it is structured or left to chance. To alleviate your concerns, we can implement a net safety protocol where, if the Council unanimously decides against the Sovereign, that can act as a command override. Father finally leaned back slightly, and this is why you're actually here. Not to tell us that it can be done, but to tell us how it would be implemented. Yes, I replied calmly. This could be done without the permission of the Council. I let that point sit for a moment so they could realize the truth in it. But its implementation should be granted by the Council, and the means of its control should be agreed upon by the Council. And why, Haldrick asked carefully, should we approve it? That was the real question. Not can you do it, or should you do it? But why should they approve it if it meant putting that much power in the royal line's hands? Gazelle stepped forward, because without it, our strength remains dependent on individuals. With it, our strength becomes systemic. He looked at each of the ministers in turn. This is not about replacing our military. It is about reinforcing it. Removing gaps, eliminating vulnerabilities. And enabling your departure, Varn said. Yes, I answered when Gazelle hesitated. Yes, Gazelle echoed me. Explain that, Father said. I turned slightly toward him. You know as well as I do that Gazelle seeks further growth, and I intend to pursue the same, but neither of us will leave if it compromises Dworgen. Weiser, and this would prevent that, he said. It would ensure that our absence does not weaken the kingdom, Gazelle said. Minister Doran folded his hands. Or it would ensure the kingdom no longer needs you. I smiled slightly. That's the goal, exactly. That landed differently than anything else we'd said so far. Not because it was arrogant, but because I meant it. Gazelle looked at Father. Our duty is to Dworgen, not to our own importance within it. If there is a way to make the kingdom stronger without us, then we are obligated to pursue it. And if Dworgen falls because we chose to remain here instead of growing stronger, then my sister and I will have failed as Dworgen's future sovereign. The room shifted again, this time more favorably. Minister Haldrick exhaled slowly. And if this fails, it won't, I said confidently. That is not an answer, he frowned. Yes, it is, I replied immediately. And it's the correct one. These golems will not fail. Then, after a beat, I added more gently. But if you require reassurance, we can proceed incrementally. We'll start with prototype deployment under controlled testing. Then proceed to layered integration as the golems prove themselves. Minister Varn nodded slowly. That is acceptable. Father's gaze moved between us. You are asking for resources that are significant to the kingdom. We are, I nodded in agreement. And the authority to requisition these resources and control their use and implementation, he added. Yes, Gazelle confirmed. But no more authority than we already have as prince and princess. We are seeking your blessing to exercise that authority. There was a moment of silence at that. Even I was surprised at the gall Gazelle displayed when he said it. But underneath the surprise of the others was a respect for the restraint we were showing in coming to the council for their blessing, instead of simply enacting the plan straight away. Father took in a deep breath as he stared at us, then turned to look at the members of the council. Deliberate. The chamber erupted into quiet, intense discussion. Gazelle leaned slightly toward me and murmured under his breath. You're enjoying this. I smiled and let out a quiet giggle a little. You're pushing them, he pointed out. No more than you are, mister. We already have the authority, I smirked at him. Yes, well, they need to be pushed, Gazelle relented. But they don't like to be pushed. I shrugged lightly. They like being left behind even less than they dislike being pushed. He huffed quietly fair. After several long minutes, the council settled. Father looked at us. The council will grant you approval. The project will begin under strict oversight. Resources will be allocated in stages. Demonstrated success will determine how much continued support you receive. I inclined my head, of course. And, he added, control systems will be reviewed and regulated. Reasonable, Gazelle nodded. Father's eyes narrowed slightly. Did you expect this outcome? Gazelle and I smiled at each other before we looked back at Father. We planned for it, I replied. He smiled and nodded. Then do not disappoint us. We won't, Gazelle bowed his head. With that, we turned and took our leave from the council chamber, ready to turn dwarven crafting history on its head by building a defense that would no longer require heroes.